It's no secret I love the Total War Warhammer series, having spent almost 3,000 combined hours on both games. Soon enough, the series will get even larger with the inclusion of the third game, which should include a multitude of units and new factions from the remaining army books that Creative Assembly have taken inspiration from. But before we look towards the third game, however, I wanted to take a step back to the already released armies. Some are mostly complete, but others still lack a rather large amount of units and characters. So in this video I would like to go over all remaining units and characters in the already released armies. Please bear in mind, I will be talking mostly about generic units. Any variants such as weapon changes and so on would not be given its own slot. Also, in another note, I will be looking at the races comparing to their own respective 8th edition variant army books. Anything released via Forge World and or White Dwarf will probably get its own video entirely. So without further ado, let's begin. First, we'll start with the Beastmen, a rather abandoned faction in the Total War series. And in truth, they were kinda abandoned by Games Workshop themselves. First, we look towards the Wargore. In theory, they should act very similar to what the Beast Lord does, but instead of being able to rise armies, they should act as agents, and we can bring them in multitudes in different armies. In theory, yes, this is a reskin, but having Wargores provide supporting attacks to your Lord may prove effective on the battlefield. Next would be the Doombull. As of yet, we still can't raise armies with Minotaurs as their leaders, which is quite disappointing to be honest. These lords and army leaders would prove effective siege attackers, so we can actually destroy cities much quicker. Once again, this would be another reskin, seeing as we already have the Gorball, but it would be nice to actually lead armies with a Doombull. Next would be the Tuskor Chariot. Yes, another reskin, and you're gonna hear this a lot during the course of this video. I do apologize guys, but hey, let's face it, GW worked a lot of reskins in. They would act a lot like the Razor Gores themselves, but they would prove to be a bit cheaper, allowing for very early on cavalry builds. There's nothing too special about them, but as we know as Beastmen players, we kinda need a little bit of speed, especially early on. Here is where we see more original units. The Jabberlife is a much requested unit in the forums. Let's face it, it is absolutely disgusting, it's got its own punch to it, it's absolutely maddening. They are pretty much early unit breakers, destroying morale and ripping apart early infantry units quite early on. The only problem with this is we know that Creative Assembly have kinda shied away from the Jabberlife, where they have confirmed that it would take a lot of time to actually create this model, which is a massive shame considering the fact that I've seen a lot of tabletop players bring this model. It is very much loved. Let's face it, the Beastmen didn't really have anything too cool, and this was actually one of their coolest models. The Gorgon itself is a bit of a meme, but it is one of the more interesting units in the Beastmen roster. Let's face it, yes, it is another reskin of the Cygor, but it focuses itself on melee attacks, throwing a flurry of attacks at enemies and just destroying enemy units. It's very well known for its special regeneration, where if it lands a killing blow, it will automatically eat something, and then gain wounds back from that, which would be a very interesting mechanic to actually implement into the game. I actually think the reason that we haven't seen this model just yet is because of that. Because let's face it, it pretty much is a Cygor model with just 2 extra arms, maybe just a bit of a change on the head, but nothing really too spectacular. In terms of units for the Beastmen, that's pretty much it, but now we move towards the legendary lords and heroes. First up would be Gorfor the Beast Lord. Yes, he is another Gore, which would put him on the same par as Khazrak One-Eye, but he is a unit destroyer, he is very capable in close combat, and he can ride a chariot, which would make him stand out a little bit. Yes, Khazrak has his own mounts, but this is because Creative Assembly like giving legendary lords their own mounts for some reason. A way to implement him could actually be just to focus on chariot-based armies, which we know Gorfor is quite famous for. Next would be Gorus Warhoof, the sire of the Centaur race. This could actually be considered a quite unique lord or hero. Currently we can't recruit any character type Centaurs, and it would be really awesome if we could actually have a full 20 stack army of just Centaurs. Yes, it wouldn't be the best army, but imagine Gorus reducing the upkeep dramatically of Centaurs so you can have a full stack early on and actually just charge out. Pair that with maybe increased campaign movement speed and he could actually be quite good at raiding. We discussed the Doom Bull already, but how about Taurox the Brass Bull? A potential unique legendary lord with an army focus on Minotaurs and Minotaurs alone. While upkeep wise that wouldn't be the most efficient army, it would prove quite useful for late game attacks onto heavily fortified cities. Lore wise, Moonclaw was by far the most original Beastmen character. Yes, his stats were never actually too great, but he himself had a lot of good background. Being born from the actual physical manifestation of chaos himself, he is essentially a demon without being a demon. He had a bunch of interesting rules in the tabletop, such as being able to make a D3 stone throw attacks once per game as if he was a stone thrower, which is obviously quite a unique mechanic that would prove to be quite special for the Beastmen. Ungral Fourhorn is by far one of the saddest of the Beastmen, having been shunned by the majority of his race for killing a Bray Shaman. His army normally is consisting of lesser Beastmen and various mutants, and he is able to either buff himself melee-wise or generate random spells throughout the game, which would make him quite unique. Last for the Beastmen would be Slugtongue, a corruptor in a very weakened nature to Morgor the Shadowgave. What would set him apart from the Shadowgave though would be the fact that he's also a spellcaster. Not a talented spellcaster like Malagor however, but it would be nice to have both a corrupting nature and spells to actually blend together. Interestingly enough, the Bretonnian army roster is the most complete. Please bear in mind that Bretonnia didn't have a 7th or 8th edition book, but instead worked from the 6th edition book. As I stated before, any special characters released in Forge World or White Dwarf will have its own video covering them separately. On our third spot we look towards the Dark Elves, with the first unit being that of the Master. Once again, this would just be a hero type character very similar to the Wargore. We already have the Dreadlord who leads the armies, but it would be nice to have Masters to be able to flank him. High Beast Masters would be a welcome addition to the army, considering with the last recent few patches we have been receiving a bunch of monsters to the Dark Elven roster. And it would make sense to have these characters as heroes to be able to buff these monsters such as the Hydra, the Carabus, and the Manticore. They would be useless by themselves, but paired with these monsters they should be able to buff them up and actually make them more useful in battle. The Scourge Runner Chariot is one of my favourite units in the Dark Elf roster. It is a fast moving artillery piece, which a lot of people would claim to be unbalanced, however it gives the Dark Elves a bit more flavour, seeing as they are quite a highly movable faction. I was honestly quite surprised, given the amount of DLC content that we haven't still received the Bloodrack Shrine or the Bloodrack Medusae. Considering the fact that they are quite the fantasy trope, they should have already been placed into the game. They would be able to buff your unit's leadership to keep them into the fight a little bit longer, whilst also reducing the leadership of the enemy. This would actually work really well for those who like melee-based armies for the Dark Elves, but don't like working so much with Witch Elves. Now we look towards the named heroes of the Dark Elves who are yet to be implemented, the first being Malus Darkblade. He would focus around cavalry-based armies, which would give you a little bit of different flavour rather than using a lot of footmen. This would allow players to actually make full armies of Cold One Riders, Cold One Chariots, and so on, which would work as a perfect fast attack army when you're moving into new lands to take over. Shadowblade himself has always been quite the favourite of mine, but I don't think he should be used as a legendary hero. Rather, I believe he should be a special right character, appearing every few turns to kill something right out. For example, if you finally manage to launch an invasion of Ulthuan, you can recruit Shadowblade to dispose of Tyrion for a few turns. This should more or less be a downright copy of Elithanar's events where he can kill off characters. Now I understand that this is a copy of an event, but that means that it can already be implemented into the game. Kuron Darkhand, Captain of the Black Guard, should act as a legendary hero instead of a legendary lord, where he can join an army and dramatically reduce the cost of the Black Guard of Nargothrond by about maybe 15 to 20%, making them very effective for one doom stack of an army. While this can actually be considered quite overpowered, remember it would only affect one army, so it's not like it's affecting map-wide. Last but not least for the Dark Elves would be Talaris Dreadbringer. He is the captain of the Hageneth Executioners and would most likely buff them quite dramatically whilst reducing their upkeep. He is a character that specialises in melee combat, which would be a nice little change considering that Morathi's a spellcaster, Helebron is not that good, and Malekith himself, well let's face it, he is more of a spellcaster than anything else. There is also the fact of Lokia Fellheart, but I don't think they've done him justice. They should have actually focused more on Corsairs. I honestly think that Lokia should have been more fitting of a horde-based army, kinda like the Vampire Coast, given that in the lore he's always travelling. Next we look towards the Dwarves, whose army roster is pretty much almost completed. The only unnamed units that actually come to mind at this point are Dragon Slayers and Demon Slayers, which itself would be easy to implement into the game, barring the fact that they would be very situational. As their name suggests, they would be very situational when fighting against demons and dragons, but given the fact that the Demons of Chaos are still yet to be released, it doesn't make any sense for Demon Slayers just yet. Rather quickly, we move on to the remaining legendary lords. Forik Ironbrow is a master rune lord of Karak Azul, with rune lords being typically used to shut down magic phases of the enemy. Given the fact that he is so good at shutting down magic phases, it would be rather interesting if they could make it that Forik could actually deny spells outright. Maybe a special item that can only be used once or twice per battle. Grim Burluxon is the ultimate master engineer. If you're a fan of dwarven gunlines and heavy artillery armies, he would be the perfect lord or hero for you. Given the fact that he buffs up artillery and ranged units, it would be incredible to see him actually holding the line with a pure gunline army. The last lord for the dwarves is actually Joseph Bugman, and I find it rather confusing that he's not actually been implemented into the game, given the fact that we already can recruit Bugman's rangers. This would be a dwarf lord that would change up how to play the dwarves. Given the fact that Bugman normally focuses on ranger based armies, it would be very interesting to see a skirmish style army for the dwarves. There's not much to say there, other than the fact that you would be changing how to play the dwarves dramatically with just one army, which in itself is quite unique, and it would actually give you incentive to go out and confederate with him, or recruit him if he was a hero. Now we look towards the High Elves, with the first being the Archmage. I find it very interesting that the High Elves, a race which is known for their proficiency in magic, don't have army leaders which can wield magic. Yes, while we do have access to mages as army captains, it would be nice to field a caster-based army. The same confusion also falls towards the Lothran Sea Helms. Seeing how popular the Lothran Sea Guard are, it's very weird that we can't actually get a Sea Helm to join our army. The Sea Helms could probably buff up the Sea Guard very minorly, such as giving them a bit more range, maybe a bit more ammunition, and maybe a 2% reduction in upkeep. Nothing too overpowered, but at least something to give players incentive to recruit him. The Lothran Skycutter is a unit that I very much doubt will ever get implemented. Much like the Dark Elf Scourgewarner chariot, it is a fast-moving chariot which has a mounted bolt thrower. However, it also fights on the air rather than on the ground, which might make it a little bit difficult for balancing purposes. Balance aside, it is still pretty cool. Lion Chariots of Sharace would be a welcome addition to the High Elven roster. Not only is it an iconic unit, but it is also visually different to many other chariots, and would provide a monstrous type unit for the High Elves to use in ground combat. Plus, let's face it, in the rule of cool, a chariot pulled by lions is freaking awesome. Dragon Mages of Caledor are rather interesting when you look towards the tabletop. They might not be the best fighters, but they can kinda hold themselves off. What really sets them apart is that they are also casters who use the Lore of Fire. Which, interestingly enough, as of yet, you cannot use the Lore of Fire as a High Elf player. The Anointed of Asuryan are captains of the Phoenix Guard. They are devastating warriors, which may provide a more melee-based incentive for High Elf players, rather than the typical magic-based or ranged combat. Yes, the High Elves don't have the best melee, but it would be kinda cool to actually see them being used more. Let's be honest here, how many of you actually build up full armies of Lothran Sea Guard and just wait? Moving on to the missing legendary lords and heroes, we have Eltharion the Grim. Many people want him, let's face it, he is very much requested in the forums and the Reddit and so on, so it's more than likely we will see him eventually. He's a melee-based hero who has a very powerful griffin, and more than likely we'll finally see a different starting position for the High Elves. I am pretty bored of starting in Ulfward, or in Nargothrond, or Lustria. It would be kinda nice to actually have a different starting position, more than likely somewhere in the Badlands fighting the Greenskins, considering that Eltharion has a lot of history with the Greenskins. There are only two named characters left for the High Elves, but I'm going to talk about them both together, considering that they would both be legendary heroes, and they would most likely function the same, barring a few differences. These would be Corhill, Captain of the White Lions, and Caradrian, the Captain of the Phoenix Guard. Both are exceptional melee-based fighters, which would most likely reduce the upkeep to their respective units and probably give them a small minor buff in combat, but nothing special other than that. Other than the fact that the Captain of the Phoenix Guard can also ride a Frostheart Griffin, which would be kinda cool. Next we move on to the Lizardmen, which require not so many units, and it's a shame that none of them actually came to fruition when we actually got the new DLC pack. With its first unit being a Troglodon, very similar to the Carnosaur but focusing on poison attacks more than actual brute force. They would also be used as fast units, so you could actually just swarm around quite easily. They would act as mounts for the Skink Oracles, which would actually give them something a bit more beefier, rather than just a flying mount or the Stegodon, which you'd normally keep back anyways. I just want more big beasties, and let's face it, the Lizardmen have the biggest of beasties. Jungle Swarms are lacking from the game, but we shouldn't really have them as a unit. Instead, they should be treated as a very minor spell, kinda like how the Tomb Kings use their Scarab Swarms. Let's face it, swarms were never really good in the tabletop, and they wouldn't be any good here. They can just be used as kinda as a method to slow down an enemy, and that's pretty much it. But for the last unit of the Lizardmen, we have the Razordon. It's pretty much just a heavily armored salamander, essentially. But it would be cool to have something of a skirmisher type unit with that, and just being able to swarm around. The salamanders themselves aren't really great in close combat. Yeah, early game they are, but when it gets a little bit later into the campaign, they are pretty much useless. But other than that, those are pretty much the only lacking units. Now let's move on to the named characters. Gorok the Great White Lizard. He is a powerhouse in the tabletop, being a very capable melee base lord that doesn't require a mount. I'm looking at you, Krokgar. Honestly, I would just see him as a pure melee-based lord with an incredible ward save, which would reflect his resilient rule that comes in the tabletop, where he can actually deny multiple wounds caused upon him and actually just reduce them to a singular wound. Chakax the Eternity Warden is another melee powerhouse, but he specializes working with other temple guards, meaning that if he was implemented into the game, he would most likely be a legendary hero, but he would be able to dramatically increase the power and worth of temple guards, giving them perhaps the unbreakable special rule and making them a little bit worth it more in combat, probably a little buff to their damage, and then perhaps a small reduction to their upkeep. Teto Echo is one of those rather interesting skinks. He is a spellcaster, yes, but he's also an army leader at certain points. The great thing about him is we can actually have an army leader as a spellcaster without having to rely on risking Arslan. Let's face it, we would rather use Arslan in more important matters and just send off a named character who could also spellcast somewhere else. Perhaps dealing with the Vampire Coast as we're busy with our actual Slan moving towards Nargothrond. Oxyotl is another special skink. Not only is he a chameleon skink, but he is also a named character. We could use him as a legendary hero to buff up chameleon skinks and make their worth a little bit more. Perhaps he would benefit skirmish-based armies instead of outright just charging. Naturally, this would be a legendary hero, and it would be a bit of a shame if he didn't get implemented, but we still don't know what Creative Assembly have planned with these remaining characters. But now we look towards the Greenskins, by far the race which requires the most looking at. I'm just going to talk about a few of them in general and just put them into one section, because at the end of the day, they are generic lords and heroes which should have already been added into the game. The first being the Orc Big Boss, so we could have someone defending our lord. The Savage Orc War Boss and Big Boss, so we could have a leader and a defender. The Black Orc War Boss and the Big Boss. The Great Orc Shaman. The Savage Orc Shaman and Savage Orc Great Shaman. The Night Goblin Great Shaman and the Standard Goblin Shaman. These are all generic lord and hero choices for the Greenskin factions, the Orcs and Goblins as a whole, and it's honestly quite disappointed they haven't even been implemented yet. Let's face it, the Orcs and Goblins have the biggest variety of units, styles, sub-races and so on. Why can't we do themed armies? It's aesthetically pleasing, it's immersive, it's something that would require just basic reskins, to be honest. I'm not sure how much work goes into these reskins, to be honest, so if I am talking out of a place where I shouldn't, I do apologize. But we do see many mods that do implement these characters with just basic reskinning. They don't have to look great, it's just basic and something immersive. That being said, now we move on to generic units, that being of the Goblin Spear Chucker. It's nothing too great, it is a basic artillery piece, but it's nice to have for Goblin theme armies other than the Doom Diver Catapult. Mangler Squigs are also quite the favourite. They would work in a very similar function to Fanatics, but as an actual unit, where they just smash around and just keep doing damage constantly. It'd be really fun if these units just had a basic random movement. As soon as you deploy them on the campaign and you click start battle, that's it. They'll actually move by themselves and just constantly move like that. It's a very random aspect, and it wouldn't be very competitive, but it would be kind of fun to see. Next we'll move on to River Trolls. Yes, we already have Trolls, but these would kind of work as a Nurglite type of Troll, where they are minus to hit and so on. It would be kind of interesting to have like a tanky based unit. Basically their benefit would be to hold off choke points, which in siege battles and special maps and so on, it's kind of useful. I honestly doubt that we'll see the Snotlings and the Snotling pump wagons anytime soon at least. More than likely, since they're so similar to Noblars and pretty much could actually just be called Noblars, we'd have to wait until the third game where we actually would see the Ogre Kingdoms to actually see them being represented. It's pretty much a reskin of a reskin of a reskin. Let's face it, goblins and all goblin kind of looks the same, so a lot of people would kind of get angry with that, especially if it was a paid DLC. Units aside, we move on towards the named characters, the first one being Gorbad Ironclaw, which would provide the greenskins with a much needed cavalry-based lord. He could basically buff up ball riders and give everyone more incentive to actually just build up whole skirmishing cavalry armies, so you could actually just have a lot of fun on the battlefield. A lot of people see Gorbad as more of a melee hero, and don't get me wrong, I do too, but that would make him way too similar to Grimgor, so at this point I think a little bit of creative development should be allowed without anyone complaining. Next would be Grom the Paunch, but I doubt we should actually speak too much about him. Let's face it, given the amount of time that he's been on the forums and the Reddit, he's pretty much going to be coming soon at some point. Like, I don't want to just throw it all out there and all that, but I honestly think that he's in development as we speak. Instead, we'd look towards Snagler Grobspit, a uniquely named Goblin Spider Rider who might actually make Spider Riders a little bit better and not just early game units. It would be nice to see them in later game campaigns and so on, especially since they've got poison attacks, they are quite fast, you can use them to flank, they are quite useful. There's also Gatilla the Hunter, which would pretty much do the same as Snaglar, but instead of benefiting Spider Riders, he would in turn benefit Wolf Riders. There's not much to say about the greenskins, to be honest, other than the massive lack of lords and heroes, which is a massive shame. Honestly, I hope that we eventually get them back. We know that the greenskins are due an update soon, so hopefully before Game 3 comes out, we'll see that. But let's not stay with the greenskins too long and move on to my favourite race, the Skaven. As can be expected, the first thing that is missing is the Chieftain. Just a basic melee type hero which I can bring around, especially when playing a Skrulk. He does need some extra defense sometimes. While we're at it, and I know it's very unlikely that we'll see these two, there is a little notion of the War Litter and Great Poxrat mounts. It's highly unlikely that we'll ever see them, considering the fact that they will require quite a lot of moulding work to them, creating a new skeleton and so on, but hey, a guy can dream, can't he? But without getting too distracted, next up on our list would be the Vermin Lord, the only demon in the Skaven roster. More than likely we'd probably see him in Game 3 due to the fact that it is a end times unit, even though we have had these demons for a long time, I believe since 6th edition or 7th, but still, we'll see them eventually, I'm pretty sure of it. What I am hoping is that we will get all the variants of Vermin Lord so we can actually focus theme our armies. I believe there are 5 variants of Vermin Lord, each kinda going after each of the major clans, plus one war-styled one which follows Clan Moors. Each would give their own benefit, you could use them as spellcasters, you can use them as melee demons, it would be really cool to see Vermin Lords. Our 3rd and 4th spots really fall towards the Packmasters and the Giant Rats. Giant Rats are needed because they're very core-based units, they were given their own little ranking and so on in the tabletop. And yeah, they might not be the best of units, but they pretty much have the same baseline stats as the Clan Rats. We obviously can't have Giant Rats without Packmasters. The Packmasters could be used as a area of effect buff that can buff up Giant Rats and any other beasties like Rat Ogres. It would be kinda cool to have something to buff up a unit. Quickly moving on, we still have 2 weapons themes that haven't been implemented into the game. That are the Poison Wind Motors and Warp Grinder. The Poison Wind Motors could be used very similar to how the Vampire Counts use their very basic artillery pieces. It's just something fun to be able to use, and something that's quite mobile too. This will make it easier to move around, especially when having to deal with large enemies. As for the Warp Grinder, honestly, I don't see it as a unit. I see it more as a purchasable item that would make your army vanguard for a while. I'm not too sure how that could be implemented, but it just makes a lot more sense rather than just implementing it from the tabletop, because let's face it, it was kinda horrible and pretty much nobody used it. We're quickly moving on to the named characters here, with the first one being Frot the Unclean. I honestly think he'll show up soon anyway, so there's not much point talking about him. He is a master molder for Clan Molder, and during his time he's created many horrifying creations. But the main reason why I think he'll eventually be in the Total War Warhammer series is because he and Ikit Claw teamed up to create the Storm Fiends. And let's face it, you can't go full End Times without Storm Fiends. We'll be discussing End Times units and heroes in their own separate video because they've got pretty much a lot of stuff to go through. Next up is Squeal Gnawtooth, who is pretty much a Packmaster, but he was a named one which had bonuses and benefits to Giant Rats and Rat Ogres. It would be cool if we saw him as a legendary hero, but if we're already getting Packmasters as a sort of hero, there's no point. Honestly, when it comes to these named Skaven Lords, I think we're going to see them definitely. It might take some time, but it's something that more than likely is going to be a full roster. With the Deathmaster's voice lines being data mined a few weeks ago or months ago, and let's face it, Thanquol and Bone Ripper will be a definite, because let's face it, they are one of the most iconic duos in the Warhammer Fantasy franchise, and it would be a massive shame if they didn't implement them, plus everyone is pretty much expecting it at this point. Moving on quickly towards the Empire, once again it's another generic lord that we should have had quite some time ago. That of the Battle Wizard Lord. We do have quite generic fighter types as lords, and we do have all these spellcasters as heroes, but let's face it, you can actually bring those heroes as lords too, so we should actually have them and be able to use spellcaster based armies. I said it before and I'll say it again, I understand it's a basic reskin, but the fact is a lot of people do theme their armies. Those who used to play the tabletop game would want to probably build the army they used to play and so on. So it's just kind of nice to have. A reskin is better than nothing, guys, I assure you. The Empire Master Engineer would be a great addition to the Lords and Heroes roster. You can have them buff up artillery pieces and so on, which would be kind of cool to have, especially for an Empire gunline army. Plus, if they want to be extra cool about it, they can have those mechanical exploding pigeons, which would be amazing. There's not really much missing other than the Huntsman, which would be a skirmish type archer unit, and the Celestial Hurricanum, which surprisingly hasn't made it into the game yet. I don't understand why, especially since we were given Light Wizards. You'd expect that you'd actually have that as a baseline mount. But moving on, we do have a few Imperial characters, that of Kurt Helbog, Ludwig Schwarzhelm, Marcus Wolfhart, and Luther Huss. But the only reason I'm not going to talk about these characters is because most likely they would be based in Altdorf, and let's face it, we need different starting positions. With the only one in the book being Marius Leitdorf, which is the Elector Count of Averland. He is known as the Mad Count. He would probably have some very similar mechanics to Luther Harkin, but at the end of the day, I don't think we'll actually get him, due to the fact that they've been hyping up Boris Todbringer so much. Now, Boris isn't in the 8th edition book, I believe he was in 7th or 6th, but it would be cool to see that happen either way. However, I would also like Marius Leitdorf and every other Elector Count if possible, but hey, maybe Creative Assembly doesn't want our money. Which is a bit hard to believe considering that they're right now working with Games Workshop and they always want our money. I'm happy to pay for more DLC, guys, just in case anyone's watching. I feel like every time I start talking about a new faction I have to complain a little bit, and once again I will with the Tomb Kings. We need a High Lich Priest. It's important, we need to have it because it's lore friendly. You need a Lord type spellcaster that can be able to keep the army alive. It's very much embedded into the lore of the Tomb King, same as it was with the Vampire Counts. You need a very well powerful spellcaster. There's not much to say other than that. Really, there's the Tomb Herald missing, which is a bodyguard unit for kings and princes, and the Necrolith Colossus, which pretty much didn't have a model. This was the time where GW would just create rules and not give you anything. Kit bashing was advised if that was the case, which was amazing, don't get me wrong, but I would have preferred an original model. That being said, some of the kit bashers I saw back in the day were amazing, like absolutely stunning. So I guess here Creative Assembly has a bit of a chance to kind of create their own thing. The Tomb King roster is pretty much complete, barring what we've just spoken about, and Prince Apophis, which would have been an assassin type hero, which would have been pretty damn good to have, especially early on. And Ramotep the Visionary, which is pretty much a named Necrotect, but in truth, I don't think Necrotechs had any purpose, to be honest, in the tabletop. Like, not a lot of people used them. I might be wrong here, but I did play a lot of Tomb King players in the past, and to be honest, I never really saw one being used. There's not a lot left to this video, guys, just 3 more races, but as you can see, there are a decent amount of units and named characters, even basic characters that haven't been implemented into the game. But moving on to the Vampire Counts first, we have the melee-based Vampire Hero. We need one, badly, something to do some damage. It's just really well needed. I myself like theme armies, so I normally use a Master Necromancer as the Lord, with maybe one of the Blood-Kissed Vampires if it's the case that I actually have it available, but I would like a melee Vampire Hero just to bring along. Other than that, there are just some basic units left. There's the Bat Swarm, which once again we'd just say would fall into a spell category for a swarm, nothing too special because let's face it, it's not really great. Spirit Host should definitely come into the game because that's something that has been needed for a while. They'd work a lot like the Spirit Cavalry that we already have, but they're just basic units. You could use them to just flank and so on. It would be kind of cool. More than likely, they're probably just saving that for Nagash's eventual appearance into the game because let's face it, he does need some units to come along with him. While unlikely, it would be cool to see the Abyssal Terror mount make an appearance, same as the Coven Throne, which is quite a unique unit because it has a Lamian architecture type. With its own unique look and style, it's pretty much very Lamian, and let's face it, the only time we'd actually see a unit like this is if they actually implement Queen Neferata. Which, given the recent hints, it might look like she will appear in Game 3. Let's hope. I'm actually hoping for this because I would really love to see that unit. But given those units aside, there's only really one named character left in the actual 8th edition army book. That of Konrad von Karstein, the Mad Dog of Sylvania. He's an absolute melee destroyer. He would be a powerhouse on the battlefield with no spells or magic whatsoever, just smashing his way through lines, furiously destroying enemies. Think of it as a Strigoi Ghoul King, but a bit faster and less ugly looking. I think Konrad would make a perfect fit, especially if they're actually just trying to finish off the whole roster. He's pretty much just in Blood Knight armor. All Creative Assembly really needs to do is change his face, get a voice actor, and change his weapon to 2 one-handed blades. Pretty much sorted from there. Moving on to our second to last army, it's the Warriors of Chaos. Now, I don't think we're going to get an update for them until Game 3. It's just that it makes a lot more sense if they wait, given the fact that what's missing are the special mounts like the Palanquin of Nurgle, the Skull Crushers of Khorne, the Hellstriders of Slaanesh, the Chimera, the Chaos Ogres, the Chaos War Shrine, the Mutilith Vortex Beast, the Slaughter Brute, and a plethora of named heroes such as Valkyr the Bloody, Village the Curseling, Festus the Leechlord, Sylar, and Gorrock. Now, you might be wondering why I'm not really going into detail with these things, and it's purely because a lot of things we've mentioned are either Chaos Demons or stuff that will have assets that come in Game 3. So let's face it, we're not going to get Chaos Ogres yet, we're not going to get the Hellstriders yet, and so on, because it just makes sense to release them as a big pack in Game 3. It's rather disappointing, yes I know, it's a lot of stuff that really needs to be implemented, but I kind of saw that coming when they said that Game 3 was going to be total chaos, in their own words. It's just like, well, we're missing a lot of iconic units, and let's face it, the Warriors of Chaos faction kinda sucks at the moment. Like, really, really badly. It's just really, really disappointing considering that it was the first DLC release for the game that actually launched on launch day for the first game, and we're not gonna see anything change to it for maybe another year, if anything? That's my biggest problem with that DLC. I mean, I purchased it with the pre-order bonus and so on, but I was so disappointed with it. Like, it requires a lot of stuff. We need marked units, we need all this. And it's just, why? They better not release another DLC if that's the case, because I don't want to see a DLC for a DLC if it's for a race that was supposed to be the first ever DLC and has got no updates to it whatsoever. Yes, they did add in some minor quality of life things, like adding in the Manticore and so on, but still not enough, I'm sorry. They need to work on this faction pretty hard. It's the worst faction in the game at the moment. And yeah, I even consider the Beastmen to be better than the Warriors of Chaos. Now, ranting aside, moving on to the final faction, the Wood Elves. They pretty much don't need a lot of work, just some reskins. The Glade Captain, the Spellweaver, and the Shadow Dancer, those are 3 Lord and Hero choices which pretty much can just be reskinned and be done with it. With only named characters left, to be honest. Araloth, Draika, and the Sisters of Twilight. Araloth and Draika would pretty much be reskins too. It's not like a lot of work is required into that, barring the voice acting of course and any special items and events they need. But really, the only one that would require any work, and to be honest I believe was already shut down by Creative Assembly, is the Sisters of Twilight. 2 twin sisters who ride upon a green dragon, and they are known to being pretty beastly on the tabletop, plus on the lore. It's stated that you need to kill them both outright for them to properly die, with one surviving, the other one would revive shortly after. It's insane, but I believe that Creative Assembly's stance on it was that it was really complicated to do 2 heroes as a singular unit. Which, you know, fair enough, but I wish they would actually implement it in some way, shape or form. I've seen some mods which have done it with 2 heroes as a singular hero unit. It might be weird with the mounts, but maybe on foot it might be cool. But I'm not a programmer, so I can't really tell you how easy or difficult it is to implement. Honestly, I'm just doing this list because it's a cool idea. I would love to see everything from the tabletop eventually. I'm just a massive fan of Warhammer Fantasy, so it would be cool to see everything, not just from the army books, but also from Forge World and the White Dwarf supplements, plus anything else that might have been special. It would be really, really cool. However, I understand that a lot of work gets put into this game, so if anyone from Creative Assembly is actually watching this, which I really highly doubt, you guys are doing an amazing job. Honestly, I can't thank you enough for creating this game. It's been bringing back a lot of players to the tabletop scene where I'm from. So I've been playing a lot more Warhammer Fantasy Tabletop. so I'm extremely grateful. But with that, my friends, we have ranted for over 30 minutes regarding what is missing from the tabletop in this game. So with that, we've come to the end of our video. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. Once again, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you all again very, very soon.